Welcome to Executives at the Edge, a podcast brought to you by MEF. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers who are propelling enterprise digital transformation forward. Well, I'm really so excited to have Ray Mota. He's the CEO and principal analyst at ACG Research. And today we're going to cover really some fascinating topics. Ray has incredible insights talking to some top CXOs and board members of service providers. And we're going to talk about really what is the opportunity for service providers going forward? You know, how does cybersecurity play in this for more higher margin services, AI, and finally NAS, and get to full NAS capability, because really providers have to get there. So Ray, if you can please tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and ACG Research.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it should be a national holiday because today's opening day, so I'm surprised I'm actually in the podcast, but we'll get started with it. Yeah, so if you look at ACG, there's two different parts of the company. There's the analyst and consulting side, and then there's the business analytics side, SaaS software. And on the analyst and consultant side, we work with a lot of service providers where we work with a lot of strategic roadmap, architectural development, and developing new strategies, whether it's managed service or everything ranging from segment routing or collapsing of layers and doing the forecast and TAM and that piece of it. And then the white papers from that side. And we also work with a lot of vendors where we have retainers where we work with them on similar type concept on that. And then outside of the analyst research side, we have another side to our business, which is the ACG Business Analytic, where we developed a digital twin software that does economic simulation modeling. So you have some tier ones and some large enterprises that are using it for decision making so that any feature or capability that any vendor suggests, whether it's architectural, automation, or AI, they're able to map it to economic benefit and value and simulate whether it's impacting OpEx or CapEx. So those are the two sides to our business. So it's an honor to be part of the this MEF podcast.
Well, thank you, Ray, for even participating here. So very exciting, actually. Digital twins are showing up everywhere. I mean, the whole world is going towards the digital twin and being simulated from there into all kinds of AI. I just came back from the NVIDIA conference. It was quite enlightening. So, So Ray, you actually meet with a lot of CXOs and boards of service providers. What is really the top decision points or discussion points that they're thinking about in their top of their minds?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question when we start from the top down because there's some challenges. But initially, the discussions it's about customer acquisition costs, Pascal, initially, is they spend so much money to acquire the customer, right? A big priority is how do we maintain the customer? How do we increase the value of the customer and increase the lifetime value by the existing services being able to offer top quality support, right? But also being able to sell more services that are higher margin from that point of view. And so the term, ARPU, which is average revenue per user, we kind of switched the discussion to not just about ARPU, but what we call average profit per user as well. So because you spend so much money in acquiring that customer churn becomes a high priority, right? Another key component for the board level is how to create what we call differentiated sustainable service in that case, right? Because they have to spend a lot of upfront in traditional, we'll talk about NAS later, but in the traditional existing area, Pascal, they have to spend a lot of money up front and it takes them a long time. You're talking about 18 months to launch a service. So when they do that, they have to be very risk adverse to create something that's differentiated and a little bit of stickiness. And then the other part of it is how do we expand to new customers? How do we reduce the time to market? So in those discussions in the board level, Pascal, we kind of break it up into kind of like three buckets at the board level discussion. We kind of talk about what your corporate goals and objectives are, right? Whether they're about growing revenue, improving customer experience, reducing costs, or flexibility on time for that. And then we get alignment from everyone on the board to make sure, because in many cases, there might be different agendas. So there's a good way to align everybody at the board level by having that first discussion about corporate goals and objective. But then the next part is, what do they see as the threats and challenges, whether it's something that's in their control, some operational changes, some over the top skill sets, capability, or regulatory issues where we see some of this stuff going on in Europe. So that's the second part of it. And again, our goal is to get alignment. And then the third piece is, what are the opportunities? You know, the opportunities could be about simplification of architecture, faster time to revenue, monetizing existing areas, and expanding to new markets and developing verticals. So at a top level, those are at least some of their top priorities that we see going on with them.
So Ray, you talk about, these new revenue opportunities. So the telcos have been traditionally selling bandwidth. And
Yes.
that is still their bread and butter. They know how to do that. And transports has been always their game. And they've invested a lot in fiber and wired and wireless spectrums and so on. So how are they seeing that new revenue opportunity? What is that new revenue that has higher margins you talked about?
Yeah, I think it's important in that area to understand the trends that lead to why the revenue opportunity, right? So if we look at, because you mentioned like the existing connectivity service, they know how to build. Service providers are good at building scalable, reliable, secure networks, right, in that area. But what's happening, Pascal, is that the traditional connectivity service, we're seeing a deceleration in revenue retention, and it's under pressure. Right. So if you look at consistently across the board, you're seeing from 2.5 to 2.1 to 2.0 to 1.7. So even though there's a little bit of growth in that area, it's a declining deceleration in revenue. So quite a bit under pressure. And if we look over the last decade or so, the profit margins on connectivity itself have declined double digits. It ranges from 10 to 17%, depending on what region you're talking about. So in a way, the decline related to this competitive market of connectivity is being challenged on top of what the erosion that we see in the market with what over the tops are doing. Now we're seeing things with tariff inflation and the other stuff even making it more of a challenge. And that's not just on B2B. We're also seeing it on B2C from a consumer perspective, where we're seeing deceleration of revenue growth in that side of it there.
So let's think about this. So there's a deceleration, the revenue's shrinking, the margins are shrinking. And what do you think is then these new services? We talk about Chimera Network API,
Sure.
cybersecurity bolting into these transports. Is that all the new revenue opportunity, or AI?
It's not a matter that they should stop those, right? And revenue is decelerating. It's still growing, but it's decelerating from a percentage rate. But the margin is what I'm seeing. So when you ask about what is those new areas, you hear different terms, Pascal, associated with becoming from a telco to a tech code. So the whole concept related to that is what we call digital service diversification, diversifying your portfolio. So in part of that, right, is saying you've acquired this customer, right? You spent this money to acquire this customer. How do I go deeper and wider by offering things like IoT services, security, some type of vertical offering associated with fintech, right? Some type of multi-cloud collaboration where you address some of the egress costs, opportunities like NAS to be able to move at a faster pace and increase margin. And if we look at those providers that have diversified their portfolio, those particular new services have grown 10% or higher consistently across the board and at a much higher margin. So it's one of these things that I've had some discussions with some executives where they're like, wait and see. And I said, there's a cost of doing nothing. There's a cost of doing nothing, right? So this is one of those things that they have to get very aggressive with things like NAS, very aggressive by developing what we call customer personas to be able to address those particular use cases, whether SASE or IoT or NAS, to be more effective than the traditional core business that they offer, because the margins are much higher and it's growing at a double-digit revenue growth.
No, well said. I think, it's exactly the way I've always think and thought. It's the
Okay.
same thing, that what you're saying is the providers have the ability to attract many enterprise customers with their transports. Though
Right.
that business is still important to them, the margins are dropping. So how could they add on new revenue opportunities that are really going to have great margins? And cybersecurity is an example. IoT, AI is coming in.
Yes, correct.
And we talked about all these multi-clouds, but I find that they're hard, as you talked about the very early, like, how do they make those investments strategically? Because if they build them and then they will come, they don't know, and that investment can be very significantly upfront. So is the idea that they do a little trial somewhere, figure it out, or they copy, or they be fast followers and let someone else lead? I mean, I struggle with a lot of these tier ones and other providers, how they go from selling transports to all these higher margin over-the-top services.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's a valid question, and it's still a concern today, right? About the agility and the skill sets from that particular part of it, right? Because you mentioned AI as well, and it's interesting because even just some recent discussions with some chief networking officers or something like that, where they kind of yelled at me saying, Ray, we're tired of you coming in here talking about cost optimization with AI. We want to know what those new revenue opportunities with AI, right? So when it gets to those particular services, this is why in many cases it has to start at the executive or board level to be able to get the buy-in. So let's say, for instance, when I've talked about NAS to someone, I don't talk about it from a technology perspective, right? I talk about what I call a fundamental shift to the business model and how they do it today, right? From that point of view. So the challenge in many cases that you might be running into is that many of these service provider customers don't have visibility of their true economics and the costs of their services, and the cost all the way to the cost per gigabit, right? I won't mention the tier one, but there was one in North America that we were going in to help develop their SD-WAN and their SASE stuff, and we were building the pricing, the total addressable market. And one of the key things that I asked them during that part of it is, how do you make decisions today? Like on a vendor or a solution or an architecture. And they said, well, we look to lower our cost per gigabit. And I said, hey, you've got X amount of services. Give me one that your cost per gigabit so that we can figure out how to optimize it. And the answer, Pascal, was, I don't know. Right? So there's a term that this one tier one in Europe used, which I like a lot. He goes, we're making unconscious decision because we don't have the visibility of the true economics that's going on in our network, right? As opposed to making more conscious decisions for that. So for the ones that are making the shift have done a good baseline and acceptance at the board level to say, we can't continue running up this muddy hill, is what I call it, right? We need to figure out how do we diversify in that case. Now, there are challenges to their defense, Pascal, right? Because in many cases, I call it they're flying the plane, right? And they have to repair the wings while on the plane, right? Not like someone else in the ground. So some of them are very risk averse. So you have to find champions in certain areas to say, hey, this particular provider, we have to get some wins in order for the rest of the group. And kind of like what the MEF is doing is a good job of saying, what we're going to do is create certification so that it can be able to scale and be consistent across the board, right? So the reduction of that risk and the credibility, I think, it's still needed. And in the board levels, they need a reality check on what the true economics is in that particular case. So I don't know if I answer your question, but I will say the answer is half of them get it, half of them don't, you know.
But I don't think they have a choice right now. I mean, they're going to be displaced, and the over-the-top guys. I mean, not just the hyperscalers, MSPs, MSSPs.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
These guys are winning lots of business towards the enterprise, and they're going over the top, buying the transports, and just really being very innovative and delivering great cybersecurity products. A lot of AI products coming in, IoT products. And they're coming over the top.
Yeah,
they don't have to buy the spectrums. They don't have to trench the fiber. So I think I don't think there's a choice but to grow and to move rapidly. We saw how AI did in the last couple of years. It just baffled the whole society, and it's transforming society rapidly. So I really think what we're trying to do at MEF with NAS is trying to not talk about just transport, but you got to get to automation, number one. Right. You got to have an automated system inside your network and across your ecosystem. I think and even with your transports, that's to me is, table stakes. So I think a lot of them are struggling to take all that legacy stuff. So that's number one.
Yeah.
Then once you get that done, then you can layer on all the things you talk about. And I think a lot of providers worldwide are struggling just with the automation aspect of their transports even. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's 100% agreement that, and this is why, like with that board that I mentioned, when I showed them what the cost, I had to show them, Pascal, what the cost of doing nothing and being in present mode, and that's where the jaw dropped and says we have to dedicate more time and resources and stuff like this. So this is why more getting it, but between me and you, they're still not moving at a faster pace that I think they should be in that particular part of it. So that's why, like with what the TM Forum, with what the MEF are doing, are creating these blueprints to help reduce that innovation. But I still think all the parts, when you talk about AI, when you talk about automation, some people use them overlap, but the challenge with AI in many cases that I see with a lot of service providers is I change the discussion, because if you look at that report from Sequoia and then from other reports saying a large percentage, some say between 50 to 60% of these AI engagements, not just in service providers, enterprise as well, are failing because the discussions are being led from a technology perspective, not a business initiative perspective. So I when someone talks to me about AI, I had to present to the CEO and he says, hey, we want you to talk to us about AI. It's like, that's the wrong question to ask me. The question should be just, what is the challenge or opportunity that you're addressing that we need to address, and could AI solve it? And by the time we go through this process of saying, what is the challenge and opportunities, number one, right? Are there existing use cases that have been certified through the MEF or whoever that we can leverage to reduce the risk? And if there isn't, realize you're shooting for the moon. And it's a bigger risk, right? But then after those use cases, right, what is the business case that validates the investment in that use case? And one of the last parts that they skip, Pascal, is what is the execution of it, right? Do we have the resources to execute? Do we need to partner? Do we need to collaborate in that area? And when they go through that 4-step process, whether it's AI, automation, those are the projects that are being successful. Those are the projects that are being very profitable, because it's not just a technology discussion. It's a whole service solution, business discussion. Technology is the underlay to get you to that.
No, you said it so well, Ray. I mean, brilliantly said. And I think, let's just use an example. We have done all the automation in the ecosystem aspects, and we also collaborate with TM Forum to also automate within the provider's network. And so that gets them to the point where they can optimize their networks through automation and reduce their cost. Okay, margins are dropping, reduce your cost. That makes sense. But when we then went up the stack and delivered certification on SD-WAN and SASE, which is very much in demand, we find two things happening. One is big, large multinationals saying, no, I don't trust any provider to do that. They had very good transfers, but they can't really do this cybersecurity. But of course, these guys are partnering with all the big top vendors that they're buying, these multinationals are buying from, like the Ciscos, the Palos, the
Sure.
Fortinets, the Versas. So what's really confusing is what I think is a struggle is there's a lack of confidence. And so we came up with the SASE certification, SD-WAN certification, to bring that confidence for the providers to tell all of the market that it's third-party tested. But we're still seeing, a lot of the providers still not struggling with how do I bring in all of these cybersecurity and SD-WAN services. I think SD-WAN is a little bit easier because it's connectivity.
Sure.
But how do I bring these high margin, everyone needs cybersecurity, right?
Sure, yeah.
So every enterprise needs it in some level. So how do I get part of that ecosystem where I can literally get, great revenue and great volume? And I think there's a lot of struggle in that. Do you have any thoughts? Like just using cybersecurity before we go to AI?
No. With cybersecurity, I mean, security in many cases sometimes is kind of like an insurance policy in many cases, but security is as strong as your weakest link, right? And I see in many cases, whether it's a service provider or an enterprise, they'll have like 60 or 70 security products in that area, and they feel that they're secure, and what they're creating is these silos of security, not quite secure itself. Right now, there was two parts to your question. There's the part about the enterprises not going with the carrier for these type of services, right? And this is where some of the carriers have to rebrand and digitally transform, because every enterprise is moving from a digital transformation at a much faster rate than the service providers are. So the service providers do have to. So it starts with the discussion. It literally has to be what we call a culture of innovation, right? And you see certain pockets of certain carriers, like what AT&T is doing, what BT is doing in certain pockets, and others with the culture of innovation. Because if you don't have that in place, it doesn't matter what stickiness technology you bring into it, right? They're just going to move slow, right? So it starts with a transformation that they agree that enterprises are moving at a much faster rate, and they're going to move without them, right? And they have to make a choice. So this culture of innovation becomes an important aspect of it, right? Then the other part is the rebranding of who they are in the security point of view, meaning that we did an analysis a while back on enterprises, say, why didn't you switch to like a security service or to a managed service in that case? And they asked for kind of like three things, Pascal, right? They said, first of all, we need to feel that we have 100% visibility of our environment, not just a service provider, number one. Number two, we need to feel that we have some type of collaborative control, right? And then number three, if the economics don't give me 20% or higher margin difference, right, or TCO difference, it's not worth for me to switch, right? It's just not worth it for me to risk the switch. And service providers need to understand that message and go back and develop services that, yes, you have full visibility. Yes, you have level of control. Yes, we're bringing you a TCO. So it's going to take them creating this culture of innovation and transforming their services that it could be in line. Because if they go to these customers and they offer security service and it's more of a TCO than what they have today, why do I need it, right? For that particular case. And the ones that have been successful, they've done a good job of saying, we work together. We can help you on the 7x24. We can help you scale. Security is becoming professionalized, just like we talked about AI. Usually a technology optimist, but there's bad people using AI for security, vulnerability testing at a much larger scales. You're seeing security clouds that you can do DDoS attack for like $49. And so it's at a rate that they can't keep up. And the service providers need to get that message to say, this is how we complement your requirements, and they have to be more aggressive. So culture of innovation, and then all those steps to go forward with, Pascal.
Ray, I think you're spot on. Starts with business, as you said, and the culture of innovation is important. But I think it's also articulating why, as you said, why if you go with me and Mr. Service Provider, I'm going to be better than MSSP
Yes.
or you doing it yourself. And I
Correct.
think what I'm seeing is the providers really struggle with how can they say that and differentiate themselves. And I think they lack that business case, and their salespeople
do.
don't know how to sell it,
No.
right? Because the salespeople know how to sell transports. They don't know how
That's
to
right.
sell
They're
this
very
stuff.
good at transport. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to train all your salespeople, which is very hard. And then I think they have really not done a great job in articulating in their websites. And why come to me? Like, yours your ROIs, yours your your TCOs that will be much lower. Yours where I will protect you better. Now, we came up with our SASE cert was one example they could use in the collateral of this and say, look, with the MEF-CECP cert, third party tested, I can show you that, I'm a AAA rating and I protect you from many exploits, evasions, malware. So, and now we're doing the same thing with AI. We're going to come with an AI certification. And, we showed at Mobile World Congress how AI, where service providers could sell their edge, GPU as a service, which is going to be very important.
Yes.
And they own a lot of edges. How do they get GPUs? Now, of course, they have to partner initially, but how do they get, next into their edges that have GPU capabilities? So there's a lot going on that they're going to have to get a handle on. And I'm very excited about the times, very excited with our members, our board, our technology advisory board, our board of directors. They're doing all the right things, saying the right things. But I think at the end of the day, they have a lot to bring of luggage that they have to bring, forward, and they can't bring all that luggage. So, I think it's a very interesting time, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for service providers. But as you said, they have to move very fast. They got to pick it up. The world's transforming at rapid rates. So, any last thoughts before we end this segment or this episode, Ray, on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think from this point, there has to be it starts with an agreement on what the core problem is, which is what we're talking about, the culture of innovation and the lack in the branding, right? So once you start with an agreement, then you could address, what do we do next, right? And it might be whether you set up a SWAT team, you partner stronger, with the firms like yourself to say, help me reduce the risk, because they can't keep up at this rate. It's just not sustainable, Pascal. Not sustainable.
Yeah, and I think just concluding, Ray, in my point of view, if you look at what the hyperscalers did, is they modernized their offering into SaaS and PaaS and IaaS, and they don't have salespeople selling that, as they did in the old licensing models, where they were selling enterprise licenses. They go in and customers know how to buy stuff, because it's well articulated on the portals. They can see their value. They can try it. They can do everything on their own on a portal or APIs. And they can start seeing the value very fast by just, putting their toes in the water. And there's no people involved. It's fully automated.
Yeah.
And this is what we're trying to do in NAS, network as a service. Meaning, how can we bring network into that same experience as what you got from cloud, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, which is how can you come in and experiment with the network to see what the value I can get without going full, into the water completely, immersing yourself. How can I put my toes in, check it out, see how well I can get observability, visibility, how well do you actually perform, my experience. I think these are the areas where we're still maturing NAS into, to give that. So.
I will say on the NAS part of it, Pascal, and you guys are doing a good job with the certification, and I'm so glad that you're working on the definition, because in many cases, you see vendors overusing the term, and it's confusing the service provider and the enterprises of what NAS means to them, right? In many cases. So the clarity on that, because I agree with you on the NAS concept of solving that capital intensity challenge that you see. I do see that NAS address the flexibility and agility on time to market. I do see that when you look at NAS, it addresses the security beyond connectivity, where you could provide that end-to-end security at a more effective rate, and then offer the API to be able to even have more type of opportunities, and then reducing on how you do automation, because into their existing architecture today, whether it's mobile or they look at vRAN or something like that, in those cases, you see VNFs or NFVI type stack, and they say we're automated, but these silos of automation. So the goal is to say NAS could be that part to be able to address it. And the point is to get to a point where, from a customer experience, they have that self-control, self-provisioning, and simplify how they consume it, right? And I don't know why they're not getting more aggressive, because the people that have done it are getting much higher margin, right? And they're moving at a faster pace, right?
Well, Ray, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
I think we've just bored the listeners eventually, but
Sure.
what an exciting episode, Ray. Such a pleasure to have you on the show. And thank you for doing this, and such a great insight you bring. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pascal. Next time, talk more about baseball with me instead of NAS. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for Executives at the Edge. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe today. Share online a review. Find all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform and at left.net.